the most significant shift that I've ever experienced with the hearing aid was when I kicked into the Spheric Speech and Loud Noise program. Hey guys, welcome back to the Dr. Cliff Show. I'm Cliff Olson, Doctor of Audiology and founder of Applied Hearing Solutions in Phoenix, Arizona. And today I am joined by a very special guest. We've got Kevin Seitz-Paquette, who is the Senior Director of Audiologic Insights at Phonak. Kevin, thanks so much for coming out and joining me here in Arizona.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, okay, I just rattled off that in one take, by the way, your title over there at Phonak, but what the heck is a Senior Director of Audiologic Insights?
As is a very fair question. So one of the things that we have to do as a manufacturer is we have to run a lot of clinical studies and run technical measures to prove out the benefit of our products, but then we want to communicate all of that to people who need hearing aids, to the people who are fitting them. And my role is to bridge that gap between the science and then the story that we eventually want to tell.
Which is a very important role. Is that a role that's been around at Phonak for a while?
It's not been around as a formalized role. We've had various people filling in this role over the years, but it was about a year ago that we established it as an actual defined position.
Well, I think it's a very important thing. Me being an individual who tries to relay information about audiology, hearing aid technology to end users who actually are going to be wearing those hearing aids, I can understand the complexity of the nature of trying to communicate stuff from maybe like the engineering department to audiologists, and then of course to the end users as well.
Yeah, as it turns out, it's actually pretty difficult to parse through all of the technical data and the clinical data and then still talk like a normal person.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know that you face that same challenge, so but it's fun.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really great episode because I would like to help kind of bridge the gap of what things that you know from a technical standpoint and be able to relay that to individuals watching this show who want to have a better understanding of what Phonak actually has going on from a technological development and research side of things. So give us a little bit of a background of you. I know we spent a few minutes chatting. We come from, I would say, roughly like the Midwest, right? Mm-hmm. You're from Indiana, I'm from Illinois, but give us a little bit of your upbringing to give people some context about your experience.
So originally from Indiana and started out my academic journey in linguistics. I was working on phonology, which is the study of how speech sounds interact with one another. I eventually moved into a PhD in phonology, and after a few years of that, got disillusioned with the idea of academic life and decided I wanted to do something where I would actually see another human being as opposed to just being in a lab or in an office. So moved into audiology, studied audiology at Northwestern. I have a clinical background, I have an AUD. And then, ironically enough, by the time I got to the end of the AUD, I realized actually research is pretty cool, and that's what I wanted to do. So I went directly from that into clinical research within the hearing industry and have never looked back.
Very cool. And we actually have someone that we know in common. So Ashley Hughes, I actually went to school with her at the University of Illinois. Yep. You brought her name up, because of knowing where I went to school. And so how do you know her again?
She and I worked together on the same team while I was at a different manufacturer, and then we've stayed in touch over the years, and she's turned into a great friend.
Yeah, that's awesome. And she's also a runner, and I love running as well. I don't know if you're a runner, but...
I'm happy to cheer people on from the sidelines.
Right on. So I want to talk about, my first real experience working with Phonak was first year of grad school, 2012. I really liked what you guys were doing with the technology at that point. In my eyes as a student, I liked how simple and reliable and consistent it was as a performing device, the Audeo line of receiver and canal hearing aids. But you guys have been super busy since that time developing new technologies. And I think the thing that most people would like us to start talking about is Spheric Speech Clarity, because the artificial intelligence, that buzzword has really kind of taken over, not just from Phonak, but like every manufacturer is starting to throw their hat into the artificial intelligence ring. Mm-hmm. But can you kind of give us an understanding, like conceptually, like where that even came from?
So when this all started for us about 6 or 7 years ago now, one of the things that we saw as a clear opportunity with artificial intelligence, and especially deep neural networks or DNNs, was the ability to do more than just detect if speech is present in the environment or classify what type of environment that the user is in. Those are important things to do. DNNs offer the possibility to actually detect specifically what is the speech in an environment and extract it. And anybody who's used Teams or Zoom is familiar with this effect. So I think a lot of us, especially post-COVID, have had that experience where, like, say you've got somebody working in your house and you apologize for all the noise and the racket going on, and the person that you're talking to on the other end of your Teams call just is completely unaware. That's a DNN doing denoising for speech understanding. So we looked at it and realized, well, there's a huge opportunity for hearing aid users. A lot of the features that we've used to manage this problem historically have some drawbacks. So directional microphones, you have to look in a certain direction. Digital noise reduction is not so useful for improving speech intelligibility. It's mostly about listening comfort. And we saw DNN applied in the right way with the right technology underlying it as an opportunity to overcome some of those trade-offs. And it led to a pretty intense round of development effort for us.
That's really cool. So, I mean, I remember with Phonak hearing aids having the ability to use AutoSense, for instance, to identify what type of acoustic environment that you're in. And just to give viewers here an understanding of how that was working, even back when I first started getting into hearing aids, you are sitting in a quiet room like this. Not a whole lot of noise, maybe the air conditioner's running, a fan running in the room here, but the hearing aids would identify that as a calm situation. So there's a certain set of acoustic parameters that they would set up in the hearing aids, that Phonak would set up in the hearing aids, and that is how you would be wanting to hear in that room. But then, like, let's say that we get up and we go drive over to my clinic here, like we will in an hour or so. When we get into my vehicle, you're going to have the road noise and the engine noise and all of that. And all of a sudden, the hearing aid can identify that acoustic environment and switch you into a speech and car program. Then we get done at the office. We want to go out for lunch, go into a noisy restaurant. The hearing aid's like, okay, well, there's a lot of noise in here. Let's switch you into a speech and noise or speech and loud noise type program. Yeah. Now, that's a form of artificial intelligence, is it not?
That's exactly right. So to arrive at the different rules that we have to switch, we do train the system on a pretty large number of sound samples. And since we've introduced AutoSense, we've continued to improve it, make it more and more accurate. With Infinio Ultra, it's now even more accurate than it was before. We've retrained it, and we've been continuing this process because we know as more data becomes available to us and as our technology becomes more advanced, we can make it even better at the job that it does. But it's absolutely a form of artificial intelligence, and I think it's maybe an unsung hero of one of the ways that we use AI, because it's if it's operating properly, you don't even notice that it's there.
That's right. Yeah, and that's my favorite thing about it, because a lot of hearing aid users, they don't really want to be in their phones fiddling with, like, how do I adjust for this particular environment? They just want the hearing aid to work.
Exactly.
And, you know, and I will also say this, like, all of those programs that I just rattled off there are several more inside of the higher tiers of Phonak technology, but as a clinician myself, I like the fact that I can go in and I can adjust all the parameters inside of each of those programs to modify them and make them work exactly the way that I'm identifying from the patient that they want it to work.
Yep. To me, that is one of the key advantages of the way that AutoSense works. It puts the power in both the clinician's and the patient's hands to decide what happens. You can change the frequency shape, you can change a lot of the feature settings. And you as an audiologist can make that decision based off of what your patient is reporting. It also means that the patient, when they come in with complaints, there's something that can be done about it if the hearing aid's not giving them exactly the kind of experience that they need. So it's extremely flexible, but we also put a lot of work into figuring out exactly how we want that to work from a default out-of-the-box setting, so that in the average case, if there is such a thing as an average in hearing care, you don't have to do so much optimization on your own.
Well, not to have a knock against my profession, but there's also the cases where clinicians either don't have the time or don't want to spend the time to optimize every little aspect. So if out of the box something can be relatively good for a patient who doesn't have a clinician who's going to nitpick every aspect of everything, that of course is the beneficial thing.
Yep, exactly. That's something that we understand and that we try to keep in mind as we're developing these things, is that clinical efficiency really matters. It matters for the clinician and also for the patient. You know, patients also, whether they've got the ability to come in and tell their audiologist exactly what they need to be done to the hearing aid or not, they still want to be able to come in and have an efficient, quick appointment, get back out, and get to hearing. Because ultimately what we're all doing whether you're a patient coming into an audiologist asking for help or you're the audiologist on the other side trying to provide that help. The goal for everybody is that that person's able to get out and spend more of their time hearing and socializing, and making the appointments as quick and efficient as we possibly can is supporting that ultimate
Absolutely.
goal.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a bit more about deep neural networks here in a bit. I want individuals to know, like, when you were setting up, AutoSense as a company, as Phonak, when you're talking about collecting these different samples to identify, like, well, this one sounds like a car, this one sounds like a restaurant, this one sounds like your living room watching TV, like, how are they collecting those samples?
So we actually use real-world sound recordings. So there's thousands and thousands of these recordings that we now use, and we try to get as diverse of a set of recordings as we possibly can. So speech in cars, speech and noise with different languages, pure noise, music. They're recorded out real world, and I think what a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate or understand is that ultimately a person, a human being, has to go through and label a lot of these features. So there's actually, even though it's trained on AI, the AI eventually has to be told what would a human say about this situation, right? The point of the AI is to make a decision in a similar way as a human being would, and the only way it's going to learn to do that is if it knows what a human judge would say about it. So we go out and collect all of these real-world recordings, but the actual work comes in when we actually have to go in and label. Is this speech and noise? Is it speech and quiet? Is it a calm situation? And then you can start to imagine all the layers down that it could go. So, okay, it's speech and noise. Is it a female talker or a male talker? Are there one or two people talking? What kind of background noise is it? Just ad infinitum. So there's quite a bit of work that goes into preparing for it, but that background work that we have to do is what ultimately leads us to a system that can make very accurate judgments about what a human being would say about a situation.
I think I remember seeing something back again when I was maybe in school or maybe out of school that Phonak had, engineers or research audiologists, what have you, taking literal microphones and going into different environments and recording a ton of different sound scenes and then bringing them back and literally downloading them.
Yep. We've done that work, and there was a pretty large scale effort to collect additional data when we were then training our deep neural network, Spheric Speech Clarity. We had to have even more sound samples to train that. And now we're benefiting from some of that effort on the DNN training side for AutoSense, because now we have all of these additional sound samples at our disposal that we've collected either by literally, like you said, going out with a microphone and recording, like I'm at a cafe now and I'm going to make a recording, or that we've been able to then acquire through other means. But it's a pretty large amount of work, and sometimes it is as straightforward, maybe low tech as what you've described. Just an engineer going out to brunch and taking a microphone with them.
Yeah, I mean, that's about as real world as you can get, right?
Exactly,
that's
right.
Perfect. And I love that you kind of took the next question out of my mouth, which is, are you applying deep neural network aspect to classification of environments with AutoSense?
Right now, we're not using a deep neural network specifically, and the reason for that isn't because we don't have any ideas for how, or we can't, but we don't see a clear performance advantage applying a DNN for classification specifically. So for now, we're using machine learning as our way of classifying environment, and this is the sort of thing that evolves over time. Technology changes, and if and when we see the accuracy significantly improved by going to a DNN sort of architecture, then surely we'll move in that direction. But for now, when we see more or less equivalent performance, there's not necessarily a lot of need to go to that sort of technology. We're focusing our DNN efforts on the areas in audiology and in hearing aid signal processing where we see that it does provide a very clear performance advantage for what I would call traditional or conventional technology.
Got it. So I also remember seeing a study back in the day that AutoSense was better at selecting the acoustic environment than a human was. Do you remember that study? I think we were probably both in school at the same time when this came out.
Yeah, it rings a bell. I do think it was when I was still in school, but so I don't quite remember the details, but that one does ring a bell for me.
Yeah, and I think it's honestly true in a lot of aspects, because I will set up patients with different programs inside of their hearing aids. They will use AutoSense for a period of time. They graduate to the point where they can start using some of these other programs, and then they'll try to self-select, and they're like, well, I switched into this other program, but it was worse. And it's like, well, we've got your AutoSense dialed in pretty tightly here, and as long as the classification is working well, you're going to end up getting the response that you want. And then half the time, and we'll get into this as well with the Spheric Speech Clarity and the Spheric Speech and Loud Noise program, I set up a Spheric Speech and Loud Noise program for patients inside of their Phonak Sphere hearing aids, and when they go into a noisy environment, they're like, oh, I want to switch into the AI. So they'll switch into it, and they're like, I don't hear any difference. Like, I don't think that program's working. And I'm like, no, it's working. It's just AutoSense put you into it first before you had a chance to even switch it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. That can happen if patients are trying to get the A/B comparison, or maybe they're switching into it in an environment where it wasn't really designed to provide a lot of benefit. Like if you're just sitting reading a book, you're not going to necessarily hear a lot of it. I want to go back to something you just mentioned a second ago, though, that this idea that the AI switching and providing a lot of this benefit automatically. When we were improving AutoSense for Infinio Ultra, we actually had that as a very fundamental question. Like, okay, so now we've retrained AutoSense, we've improved its accuracy, but does that actually make a difference? And so one of the studies that we ran, we put the hearing aids on a KEMAR in an environment where we knew it should trigger speech and loud noise or spheric speech clarity, depending on the whether you're using Sphere or Infinio R. We validated that this environment was triggering speech and loud noise, and then we put people, human subjects, in this sound environment and had them listen to the speech and loud noise program and compare it to calm or comfort and noise, excuse me.
Yep.
So this was sort of forcing a situation where the hearing aid was either classifying what we would consider to be correct versus the hearing aid making an incorrect decision. And we actually saw both speech intelligibility and sound quality judgments significantly better with the speech and loud noise program. So when we say that we're driving the program of the hearing aid, it's not just based on vibes and how we feel like a hearing aid should operate. We actually have some clinical data to back up that patients, real people, notice the difference and actually perform better when AutoSense is making the adjustments.
So the thing that I would be nervous about is like, well, what if the classification gets it wrong? Because I can imagine that the acoustic environments of speech and loud noise and comfort and noise can be very similar, right? I think of comfort and noise as being primarily steady state noise in your environment, no speech being directed towards you. The hearing aid's like, okay, it's noisy in here, there's no speech, let's just make things more comfortable and kind of drop gain levels or increase noise reduction, things like that. If you have speech and loud noise, well, ideally there's speech being directed towards you, but in potentially even the same acoustic environment.
Yeah. One of the things that we've done to try to mitigate that is something about the way AutoSense works that certainly a lot of patients won't necessarily understand or appreciate is for AutoSense, these different programs that it's choosing are not an all or nothing decision in most cases. It might blend it, and that is, we think that's important because there might be situations where, say, there's a lot of background noise going on, but maybe there is a little bit of speech, so maybe we want to blend comfort and noise and speech and noise. But we also know that when speech is in loud noise, it's A, harder to detect and to perform, but B, it also means that the person needs the most support that we can possibly offer. So for that environment specifically, that is an all or nothing classification. So once we say speech and loud noise has been detected and the hearing aid knows that there is speech in the environment, it goes all in on either spheric speech clarity in the case of AudioSphere, or stereo zoom in the case of Infinio R.
Right, and can you kind of like delineate the differences between those? Like stereo zoom is a term that I recall back from my earlier days as an audiologist. You don't really hear it talked about a whole lot anymore. So like, what are the differences between those two?
It's a good question. The philosophical goal is the same in both. It's to support speech understanding in very difficult environments. but the way that the technology arrives at that support is completely different. So for stereo zoom, it's what we would call in engineering terms a binaural beamformer. And basically what that means is you've got two hearing aids, or two hearing aids each with two microphones, and both of those hearing aids are capable of forming a front-facing directional microphone on their own, so focusing more on whatever is in front of you versus to the sides or back. A binaural beamformer combines those two, so now you have four microphones working together, and it results in a pretty narrow focus straight to the front. So for the case of stereo zoom, the hearing aids will be able to pick up and amplify whatever is directly in front of you. So in this case, it would be picking up your voice very well, and it will naturally attenuate everything to the sides and to the back. In the case of a one-on-one situation, when you're talking to someone like this and there's loud noise around, it's extremely beneficial. But when you want to go to multiple talkers coming from the side or the back, all of a sudden now you have to choose as the person wearing the hearing aids, where am I going to look next? And that's where Spheric Speech Clarity comes in and offers some advantages. So Spheric Speech Clarity is not using a directional microphone to focus just to one direction. It's listening to the sound coming in and trying to detect what are the prominent voices and what is noise. And because it's been trained on so many sound samples and it knows what to expect speech to sound like versus what noise sounding like, it can pull those voices out and enhance them on its own without relying on a microphone to tell it where to look. So to me, that is the clear difference for how these two operate. Stereo zoom is going to be great for one-on-one, but it will rely on the person wearing the hearing aids to look in the direction they want to hear. Spheric Speech Clarity then provides about that same level of benefit in terms of signal cleaning as stereo zoom does, but it can do it for all directions or even multiple directions at the same time.
So it's interesting. I mean, theoretically, is it possible that stereo zoom would outperform Spheric Speech Clarity if you had like the ideal environment, right? Like you only want to hear the person who's directly in front of you. You don't care if someone's sneaking up on you from behind or anything like that. Or would Spheric Speech Clarity, no matter what, always outperform stereo zoom?
What we've seen in most of our technical benchmarking and in our clinical studies is in that specific situation, a user having one target directly in front of them. So one person that they're talking to, stereo zoom and Spheric Speech Clarity are about on par with each other in terms specifically of speech understanding. Where we start to see some advantages for Spheric Speech Clarity and that sort of environment are in areas related to like subjective sound quality. How natural does this feel? How clear does the speech sound to me? On an objective level, I would say stereo zoom and Spheric Speech Clarity perform about the same in that specific environment, one-on-one. But then on a subjective level, that's where we start to see some of the benefits.
Gotcha. And subjective, of course, is super important, right?
Exactly.
I mean, if we never paid attention to subjective, who knows what the heck hearing aids would sound like? You'd probably get good speech intelligibility, but if it all sounds like garbage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Not the greatest thing for the end user.
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, a hearing aid is only as beneficial as often as it gets used, right? So if the hearing aid sounds like garbage, nobody's going to use it, and then they're not going to benefit from it. And we know as professionals, there's a ton of benefits that extend beyond just hearing to high quality hearing care, and we want people to access all of those. And so it is very important that people like the sound that they get so that they actually use the devices and get the most out of them.
For sure. So I want to dive into deep neural networks a little bit more here and how Phonak in particular is using it. I know that some other manufacturers have brought out their own deep neural networks. I was even talking to you before we hit record here on the cameras that the most significant shift that I've ever experienced with the hearing aid was when, since Bluetooth came out on hearing aids, was when I kicked into the Spheric Speech and Loud Noise program on the Sphere. Now it was originally the Sphere Infinio, but you guys have actually upgraded that since then. We're now on the UltraSphere Infinio hearing aids, but that was a hugely impactful thing for me to the point where when the hearing aids died by the end of the night, because battery life was struggling a little bit on those devices, I went back to my regular hearing and I'm like, oh, this kind of sucks. So can you just, like, in your terms, because this is what you do for a living, can you help people understand, like, what the heck is a deep neural network?
A deep neural network is a type of artificial intelligence. It's basically an algorithm a family of algorithms within the machine learning umbrella. Without going into the technical details and putting all of the people who are listening to this to sleep, essentially a deep neural network is trying to mimic the way that the human brain makes decisions and processes data. So we create digital neurons, and we can combine thousands or even millions of these together to make decisions. And basically, at the simplest level, most traditional computer programming, you're giving the computer some input data and a rule, and you're asking it for the answer. So you might say, your rule is multiply by 2, here's the number 3, and so the answer is 6. For a deep neural network, we're giving the system the input data and the expected result. So in the case of training up a DNN for speech enhancement, we would be giving the input data is noisy speech, the expected result is clean speech, and we're basically trusting the algorithm to figure out the way to get there. And that's a lot like the way that people learn when they're growing up, right? Like nobody's telling a little kid, when you want to make an English verb past tense, add ed. They just notice the pattern and incorporate it into the way that they speak. And DNNs are trained up in much the same way. And that's what makes them so powerful, is they notice patterns in the data that a human engineer might never notice for themselves or might never think were so important. But a DNN with the right complexity, the right size, and the right processing power to support it can identify those patterns and can use them to actually then do something like pulling the noise out of a noisy speech and noise signal.
And so the theory is that if a deep neural network is making all of these assessments that maybe a sound engineer wouldn't even think about, to your point, that you could actually get a better result at the end versus this rule or this algorithm that the human is making.
Right, especially when it comes to something like speech enhancement or speech extraction. That's where we see just a different level of benefit using a DNN as compared to machine learning. And it's because it's such a complex problem. If anybody ever has the opportunity to look at something like a waveform of noisy speech, then you would just see, a bunch of squiggly lines, can't make out much of anything. And if somebody told you like, okay, well now I need you to tell me specifically what in there is speech, it's an almost impossible problem to solve if you're using more conventional means. But for a DNN with the right level of training, it becomes solvable.
That's awesome. And until the deep neural networks, artificial intelligence kills us all, we might as well benefit from it.
Yeah, exactly right.
For the time period at this point. So now I want to go a little bit into the. We kind of led off this episode with talking about like how Phonak realized and started working on deep neural networks. But what were the challenges that really came along with like trying to develop a deep neural network and then actually implement it inside of a hearing aid for an end user, which is an entirely different problem in and of itself?
Yeah, so it was a long process. The idea had already been pretty well established outside of the hearing aid industry. So I mentioned earlier Teams, Zoom using this sort of technology for speech enhancement. So the problem wasn't so much can it be done, it was more like how the heck are we going to get this to work on a hearing aid? We obviously had to design our own algorithm, and that eventually became Spheric Speech Clarity. That involved gathering a pretty substantial amount of data. We had to go out and get enough sound samples to train this thing up. And in particular, because of the way deep neural networks learn, we had to make sure that it would generalize. So you can imagine our headquarters is in Switzerland. If we gave it millions and millions of hours of speech and noise, and all it ever heard was Swiss German, it would be really good at identifying somebody speaking Swiss German, but then the moment you have somebody come in and speak Turkish or Chinese, it may not have any idea that that's speech. So we had to include as many voices, male, female, adult, child, different languages as we possibly could. That in itself was a pretty significant effort. We actually built a computational cluster at our headquarters to be able to help process all of these data, and I forget the exact number, but it uses the
millions,
same,
right?
Exactly, millions of sound samples, and the cluster, the computational cluster itself, uses the same amount of energy in a year as like 100 households or something. It's a huge computational cluster to help process all of this data and train the system.
Crazy.
So we had that challenge just to get the algorithm, but then the parallel problem was, how are we going to run this on a hearing aid with a hearing aid size battery? And so we actually had to go through the process of developing our own chip, purpose built for this algorithm. So the advantage that we had was that we were doing the two together. So the algorithm was being developed to run on a specific chip architecture, and the chip was being developed to run our algorithm. And so they were moving forward hand in hand, and that eventually resulted in the Deep Sonic chip that's now available in the Sphere and the Sphere Ultra hearing aids.
And so, like, I don't even understand how something goes from like, hey, I think that we should do this thing, to like actually you have it inside of a hearing aid. What type of timeline are we talking about here? And then how many hands and brains were involved in this development?
There were hundreds of people who worked on it eventually in one way or another. This took us from the moment we started until we launched in August of 2024. It was about a 5 or a 6 year process to be able to go from concept to a finished product that was ready to go. And I think, a lot of this may not sound super scientific or sexy, but it also comes down to just a bet. Because at the end of the day, we knew DNNs offered a chance to do something completely differently from the way they had been done in hearing aids in the past. But when we first started, we didn't know if it would ever actually work. And really, we were doing studies along the way on where the algorithm was running on a phone or a laptop. But it wasn't until the last, say, 12 to 18 months that we were actually doing studies with the algorithm running on a hearing aid on a human being's ears. So if you think about that, there was maybe 3.5 or 4 years of investment, and I don't even know how many man hours worth of work. And then we get to the very end, and that's the moment of truth. And so all of that work leading up to that was just this gigantic bet that we would actually be able to provide benefit. And I was lucky enough to be a part of one of the very first clinical trials for what became Sphere. And I distinctly remember the moment sitting down. I went to Switzerland, sitting down with my boss, Stefan Launer, our head of audiology innovation, and showing him some of the first results, and how nervous I was for that conversation, because all of us were just waiting, knowing that millions and millions of Swiss francs worth of investment had led up to this moment. And luckily that bet paid off. And I think the clinical studies that we've run since then, and the experiences that we hear about from actual users, patients, and their hearing care providers out in the field, tells us that those clinical studies are all pointing in the right direction, that this is really a beneficial.
Well, thank goodness, because the amount of investment of that is intense, and it literally could have all fallen flat. And that money is not necessarily wasted, but you learn something new, and it's not the thing that you wanted to learn.
Exactly. I mean, whether studies are a success or a failure, we always learn something, and it always helps us move forward and to come up with the next big idea. But having a successful outcome and clear patient benefit always feels a whole lot better of a way to learn.
Yeah, totally.
Than finding out that something didn't work.
I'm sure that people watching this are like, well, can you think of things that you guys were looking into that like, this didn't really work that well, and we spent money trying to figure it out? I remember when I was learning about hearing aids initially, that one of my instructors was like, yeah, they were testing hearing aids that had like 6 microphones, but they realized that you add an additional microphone onto each hearing aid, and it doesn't really yield that much benefit above having the 2 microphones per that can communicate together.
Mm-hmm. I should probably do my career a favor and not go into any specific examples of things that didn't work. But what I can say that I'm really proud about being a part of Phonak is that we do listen to the clinical data. And so there have been examples of things where we get into the clinical studies and we realize it's not working, and we go back and we try to either retrain or rethink the way that the product or the feature is designed, and keep iterating on it until we provide some benefit, or we realize that it's actually just never going to provide the benefit that we hoped it would. So for us, just about everything that we offer to the patients and to hearing care professionals is driven by this evidence-based approach, with clinical data, real users being fit, following standard clinical protocols, so that we know that we're we're onto something real.
The only thing I don't like about that approach is that it makes me have to read a lot more, right? Creating video content, and you know that I work directly with Phonak a lot, getting not insider information, but I work with the team over there at Phonak to find out, like, well, what are the things that we want to make sure that we get in front of the end users to make a better decision on what hearing aids they want to start using in their day-to-day lives. And I think another thing that we should talk about is we've kind of mentioned this update to Ultra. When that came out, I think there was a little confusion around that. Like, well, is this a completely new hearing aid? Is it an update to a hearing aid? Is it an update that you have to pay for, or does it come along with it? Like, what the heck is this? And there were some limitations of the first iteration of device that you guys put out with the Sphere Infinio hearing aid. And instead of releasing a brand new hearing aid to say, hey, here's these updates that we were able to put on the hearing aid, you guys actually came out with a firmware update, which I will say I appreciate greatly as a hearing care professional, and my patients appreciate it even more. Yeah. But what were some of the limitations from the original release that you guys are like, hey, you guys probably already knew that you were going to improve upon it and have this new update, but can you help us understand what those limitations were and what improvements were made with the Ultra update for the Infinio and the Infinio Sphere?
Yeah, so one of them I've already mentioned, and that was improving the accuracy of AutoSense. And that, as we've discussed, AutoSense is driving just about all of the behavior of the hearing aid for the average patient. You know, most patients aren't using a lot of manual programs to adjust the settings, and we wanted to make sure that was as accurate as it could possibly be. So we're continuing to update it and to retrain it. But I think what most people probably noticed the most was that for Sphere specifically, we've improved the efficiency of the system. We've made it more power efficient so that it can run for longer. Patients won't necessarily know this because it was a feature of the fitting software, but you certainly noticed as a hearing care provider that the original Sphere had built in by default a 3-hour time limit on it. Now the hearing aid would run a lot longer than that, but we had intentionally limited Sphere to 3 hours because we didn't want somebody to switch into it and say this sounds fantastic and kill their battery. One of the things that we worked quite a bit on between the launch of the original Sphere product and then the Ultra update was improving that power efficiency. And the way that we were able to do it, I mentioned before that we were developing the algorithm and the chip simultaneously. What we could do once we had the final chip architecture and the final algorithm was see how power efficient is this system on the chip that we built to run it on. We were working a lot on models and expected outcomes leading up to the development of it, but then we had a full year, final hardware, final software, to really study specifically where is power being used and how can we improve it and make it even more efficient. And so we took all of those learnings and put it into Spheric Speech Clarity on the Ultra update, made it even more efficient, but we didn't lose any performance. I think that's the key part, is even though it's now able to run significantly longer on a single charge, the performance is the same. So the user isn't losing out on anything, they're only gaining additional time that they can use it without having to worry about their battery.
Which is great. I mean, that was a significant update. I mean, I'm always open and honest with everybody who watches my show. Like, if there's certain things about a hearing aid that I don't like or that I feel like is a limiter for the end user, I'm going to voice that. Clearly, battery life was a big concern that we had. We initially thought that the size of the unit, and for the Ultra Sphere, or the Sphere in general, because it had to be a bit bigger. You've got 2 chips inside of it. You've got a pretty good sized battery inside of it. I don't think people understand how power hungry running a deep neural network trained chip is on a hearing aid.
Right, it certainly can be, and that's where a lot of our focus, even developing the original Sphere device and the algorithm, was making sure that that chip was as power efficient as it could be. If we wanted to go all the way over the deep end with a deep neural network in a hearing aid, if you have any patients that would be willing to wear a backpack-sized body aid, then we could probably give them even better performance than we do today. But shrinking everything down and then maintaining good performance while reducing the power consumption was a significant challenge, and that was where no small portion of our investment went when we were developing it. And now, as I mentioned, we're learning about how this device works on device, and so we've made our first improvement with the Infinio Ultra update. And we're going to keep looking for ways to improve this over time so that we make it even better in terms of the performance that it can offer patients, and even better in terms of efficiency.
Well, first and foremost, I guarantee you I have patients who be willing to wear a backpack battery in order to make this the hearing aid perform even better. But yeah, size limitations is a very real thing. I remember several years back watching Google artificial intelligence. There's this video that's out there of, and I'm sure you've seen it, where you have a camera and audio pickup, and you're listening to two different comedians, and the artificial intelligence can selectively pick out the voice of the one comedian, even though they're both talking at the same time. Same thing in a noisy cafe. It's like you activate the AI, and all of a sudden you're like isolated in on that one person that you want to hear. And it is that totally excited me from an application standpoint.
Yeah.
But then you realize that, well, they're probably running that on like a massive computer, with
Right.
unlimited energy because it's literally plugged into the wall, right?
Exactly.
And you just can't do that inside of a hearing aid. But just thinking where we've come in the past 10 years, when I really started getting deep into hearing aids and what they were capable of, to see where you guys have gone as a company in introducing this new tech is nothing short of amazing. And I think that there's a lot of people out there who think of a hearing aid as like, oh, like, what is that, $20 worth of components that I'm holding in my hand, and these things cost me thousands of dollars. Well, the good ones do anyway. How are hearing aids that expensive? And I think that we really kind of went into the why behind it. I mean, I don't know if you know how many people are over there at Phonak working behind the scenes that nobody has any clue about. And then the technology that you guys create inspires even other companies to generate new technologies.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's just isolated to Phonak and what you guys are doing.
That's right. I don't know our current headcount within R&D, but we have hundreds of people from all sorts of backgrounds: engineers, hearing scientists, audiologists, working on these products as they're being developed, all with the goal of making sure that whatever we do is providing a clinical benefit, and that it actually matches the reality of working in a clinic. That's where people with a clinical background become so important. Is an engineer can come up with the most brilliant idea ever, and then somebody with a clinical audiology background might look at it and say, well, let's rethink this, or let's redesign it. One thing that I think is especially special about Phonak and our approach is we don't just work with the people within our four walls. We also have pretty extensive university collaborations. So we partner with people all over the world who can help us evaluate our products both before and after they're launched. And that's important to us for a couple of reasons. One is, and maybe this is the most important, we sometimes really need an independent person to look at it and tell us how these things are actually working and what sort of benefit they're providing. Somebody who doesn't have such a vested interest in the outcome. The other point is that there's a lot of things that, even though we have some amazing facilities, and we have this virtual sound environment, we have VR headsets in our headquarters, we have all sorts of ways that we can study these products and these features, there's always going to be things that we can't quite do in-house, or that we can't do as well as a collaborator. So we'll partner with people strategically to figure out exactly what it is that we still need to know, and to get that independent voice. And we invest in those collaborations every year because they provide so much value to us. And we hope that by improving our products in the way that those collaborations do, it also improves your life as a clinician, and then the patient's life and the outcomes that they get.
Yeah, well, it already has done that in droves for both patients and clinicians alike. Being someone, I spend 3 days a week inside the clinic still, even though I make all this content, and you guys think this is probably all that I do, but I actually do still see patients quite extensively. And I don't necessarily want my job to be easier. That's not my goal anyway. I just want the tools that I have to work with to make my patients' lives significantly better.
Yeah.
And every innovation comes along, whether it's one that I think is an amazing innovation, or whether it's something that's more of a learning experience. They all have value. And I just, as a clinician, I greatly appreciate that. And not necessarily saying that I should speak for other clinicians, but I know that other clinicians appreciate what Phonak is doing over there as well.
Yeah, well, we're glad to hear that, and it's the sort of feedback that where we don't want to rest on our laurels either. So we know that there's always more to be done. So even though we're working hard to provide the absolute best patient experience, the best experience for clinicians that we possibly can, there's always ways that we can get better. And so, our teams right now are already working on what we'll be offering in 3 or 4 or 5 years from now. And it'll be the similar sort of approach as what we had with Sphere, where it's just a lot of trial and error and sometimes some risky bets that we hope pay off in the end. And to me, that's what's so exciting about the work that I get to do, is seeing all of this develop along the way. And it's something that I think a lot of people approaching hearing aids for the first time probably don't appreciate, is how many thousands of man hours and how much financial investment goes into developing these things, and how much of a risk it can be sometimes. You alluded earlier to what would happen if we get to the very end and it turns out that it's not providing a benefit, and that is a real risk for us. So even though it does look like, oh well, here's this little hunk of plastic, how could that cost more than 20 or 30 bucks? All of the development that goes into it is very time consuming and a pretty significant investment. And it's all for the goal of eventually helping people connect to their loved ones, to the world around them, and getting them re-engaged with their life.
Totally, totally. I think, for new hearing aid users, I don't think they really realize what things used to be like. I mean, you could go back to like the very first hearing aid ever, which is like cupping your hand behind your ear, which does have some utility, by the way. But you just look at, if you were to go back 20 years from right now and wear one of those hearing aids that was around 20 years ago, and honestly, geez, that doesn't even seem like that long ago. 2005?
Yeah,
I was in the military in 2005, and that does not seem like it was ages ago, but you take a hearing aid from 2005 and you compare it with what you guys are coming out with today.
Right.
Like, totally different ball game.
Yep. Yeah, it's this actually touches on one of the dilemmas that we have when we're studying our new technology, is that there's always the decision about what you compare yourself to. Do you compare yourself to the very last hearing aid you launched? Do you compare yourself to, say, other products on the market, to nothing at all? Maybe you want to compare no hearing aid to a hearing aid, and the decision that you make really influences the outcomes that you see. And we've never done something like going back to, say, a Claro hearing aid and comparing it back to that. But it would be fascinating to find out what would people say, because back when that was launched, it was at least in Phonak's eyes the absolute greatest thing that had been developed, and we got really positive patient and provider feedback about it. But you're right, compared to what we have now, it's nothing. And the exciting thing to me is that we're entering an era now, especially on the phone for Phonak, with the Deep Sonic chip and some of the resources and infrastructure we built up to train Spheric Speech Clarity, where we'll see things change even more over the next 5, 10, 15 years, where maybe I'll be back in 20 years from now, and you and I will be getting close to retiring and hanging it up, and we can look back at this conversation and say, what would we say about Infinio Sphere now? And it will probably be the same sort of thing, where hearing aids will progress so much in that time that even what we're doing now that seems as amazing and as beneficial as it actually is, will just seem like small potatoes compared to what we're doing.
You sound like me talking to one of my patients, because I tell them all the time, like, hey, you think this is flipping amazing from what you're coming off of? Like, we're going to be sitting here in 20 years. I literally say 20 years, which is hilarious. We did not talk about this beforehand. And I'm like, we will be sitting there laughing at the tech that I was fitting on you today because of how freaking crazy it's going to be in the future. You know, the one trap that people have to prevent themselves from falling into is well, shoot, if it's going to be better in like 5 years, why don't I just wait for that tech to come out? Because you will literally do that over and over and over again. And 5 years from now, it'll be like, but in 5 years from now, it'll be even better.
Exactly. And I think for people who know that they have hearing loss, the best time to take care or take action about your hearing loss is right now. Like you said, there will always be something better on the horizon, and that will still be there whether or not you are hearing today. Whether or not you're hearing today or not. So, taking action early and reconnecting, learning how to use hearing aids, learning how to re-engage socially. I mean, there is a learning curve to getting back into an active social life if you've been disconnected for a while. It is only going to set you up for even more success when that 5-year technology comes. And then you can look forward to whatever's 5 years after that and after that. But you're right. I mean, it certainly is not a good reason to delay getting hearing care, because there's things that you're missing today that are important.
I've never had anyone get treated with hearing aids at a best practice level saying that it was ever a bad decision.
Yep.
So hearing is a vital sense that allows you to stay in contact with people that you know and love. There's a lot of research that's out there coming out about hearing loss and cognitive decline. I know that Phonak has put in some time into investigating all of that as well.
Yep.
But you know, treating hearing loss with today's technology is substantially easier and a better experience overall than what it used to be. And hopefully you guys will keep driving that forward. And I know you got to get back into your hole and do more research over there. The facilities are fantastic over there in Stäfa, the headquarters of Phonak. I had a chance several years ago to go out there, got to hang out in the wind tunnel a little bit, which was a good time. Got to see the 3D rooms like you were talking about, and now they have like visual aspects added to that. I'm actually planning a trip to go back out to Europe here later this year, so hopefully I'll be able to go and experience all the new research locations that you guys have out there at this point. So
yeah, we'd love to have you visit.
Awesome. Kevin, hey, thank you so much for coming all the way out here to Arizona to chat with me. I do have a special gift for everybody who comes on the show. Depending on how much you watch my show, you may know what this is or not, but you get your own Dr. Cliff Show mug. So feel free to take that and sport it around wherever you want to. But a small token of my gratitude for you coming out.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll put this to good use. I drink too much coffee,
so
there
you
go. A lot of mileage.
That's what you got to do nowadays. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, do me a huge favor, click the like button. It really helps out the channel. And if you want to see more videos just like this one, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on, and we'll see you in the next episode.